Hello everybody, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. Today I'm doing a Jet Li movie tier list. I've previously done tier lists for Iko Uwais, Tony Jaa, and Jackie Chan. So if you want to check those out, those links will be in the description, on the iCard, and they'll be on the end screen at the end. I'm shooting this at the same time as I'm shooting another tier list for Donnie Yen, so stick around for that too if it interests you. We have 18 Jet Li movies to get through. There's a mixture of his Hong Kong made films with his other films made abroad. Let's get ranking. These are in a randomized order, and we start off with what doesn't have the English title on here, but I believe the English title is Martial Arts of Shaolin. This is part of the Shaolin Kids series. It's not the first one, but it's the only one I've actually seen at this point, because tracking them down can be a little tricky to get a good subtitled, good picture quality version of it. And they're pretty isolated. You don't need to see the other ones. Like, not having seen the other Shaolin Kids movies had absolutely no impact on my enjoyment and understanding of this film. So if you can only find one of the Shaolin Kids movies and it's not the first, don't worry, it's not going to make too much of a difference. Martial Arts of Shaolin is probably the closest to Jackie Chan's style that you will find Jet Li performing. There's a deep blending of humor and action, which a lot of Jet Li's movies didn't have. His films tend to be a little more on the serious side, a little more gritty. In Martial Arts of Shaolin, he's very young, and he looks even younger. He looks like a little kid, like a 12-year-old, like a 14, 15-year-old at the most. He looks very young. But his physicality is insanely impressive. Even just the training sequences at the beginning are impressive. He doesn't even need to be fighting anybody. Just seeing him work out is pretty impressive. Martial Arts of Shaolin might take a little while to get to the fighting, but it remains pretty entertaining all throughout. I was laughing. It had me on board just for the humor, even before the action really took off. The action sort of perfectly bridges the gap between the older school of martial arts and the newer school that Jackie Chan and company helped to sort of usher in. So it's interesting just as a time capsule piece, even if the rest of the film was weaker, which it's not. It's an enjoyable film. The action is insanely fast, and it gets huge at the end. The final fight is as dozens and dozens and dozens of people all fighting simultaneously, all falling in the water and stuff. It's kind of like a video game with everyone flying at you and using their different moves and stuff. And when someone gets knocked in the water, it's like they're eliminated. They're just out of the fight somehow, even though they just fell in the water and they could just swim back on board. Doesn't make a ton of sense. There's some dated humor, some stuff that doesn't work. The story's not super gripping, but it's enjoyable. It's somewhere in the A or B tier. I'm going to, right now, slot it in the B tier. I could see it maybe moving up to A upon rewatch. Right now, I'd say it's pretty comfortably in the B tier. Next up, we have one of his non-Hong Kong movies. We have Romeo Must Die. Romeo Must Die is one of his not great action movies. Not good. It's pretty bad. It's super goofy. I don't know why, but at a certain point, all of Jet Li's non-Hong Kong action movies were all cut like hip-hop music videos. They were all cut like that, and they had the flashes and really bad CGI, like this CGI skeletons in this when he punches people. It's like the Mortal Kombat X-ray finishers, It looks like a music video at points. The cinematography in this is horrendous for an action film. Even for a music video, it would still look bad. But it's definitely that flavor of cinematography. So it's like instead of focusing on Jet Li's punching and kicking, the camera operator drifts over into some female extra's ass, and that's what they focus on instead of the fight that's happening. Or there's a fight going on, and for some reason they decided to shoot it from behind a row of beer taps, and that's taking up the majority of the foreground, obscuring the fight. It's a mess. The cinematography in these fights is terrible, and maybe even worse than the editing. I don't know, the editing's pretty bad too, though. The objectification of women is really extreme in this one. There's one point where Jet Li literally uses a woman as a literal object. He picks her up and swings her around like nunchucks. If the objectification wasn't extreme enough already, it's a really bad one. Not a lot of good I can say about it. It's E or F tier. I'm gonna be a little forgiving. I'm putting it in the E tier. It's bad. Not worth watching. Next up is the Expendables, which a lot of people like the Expendables movies, and in theory, I would be on board with it. Like the idea as it would have been pitched of, bringing together all these action icons. Jet Li is pretty much the only non-Hollywood action icon in these movies, at least in the first one anyway. But his fight scenes are completely neutered. They're shot so darkly and so shakily, and they're edited so rapidly that you can't even see what he's doing, like hardly at all. His talent is completely squandered. And I don't like the Expendables movies in general. The first Expendables I had high hopes for and was extremely disappointed in. I don't think it's executed very well. Feels neutered with the PG-13 rating. The only part that I remember about that movie in a positive light is Terry Crews's big automatic shotgun thing. That thing is great. I love the sound design on it. Other than that, though, that's really the only positive I can say about that movie. You're mixing other people in there like Randy Couture. It's like, yeah, he's a good MMA fighter, but he's not a good actor, and he's not really an action star. Expendables, not my cup of tea. I give it the D tier. Next up, we have Once Upon a Time in China. This one I've seen a while ago, so my memory is a little bit hazy on it. It's pretty solidly remembered as a classic, and it deserves that status. I don't remember too many individual moments from it, though. Like I said, it has been a while, so I'll revisit it. But in my memory, I remember enjoying it, but I don't remember being wowed by anything in particular. None of the fights stood out, not particularly memorable. I remember being a little more like run-of-the-mill than I was expecting going into it. So for right now, I'm going to slot it into the C tier. Kiss of the Dragon, another Jet Li movie set in France. This one has Luc Besson's involvement. It still has some of the hip-hop editing and cinematography, but it's not as extreme as it was in Romeo Must Die. It's not as ridiculous. There are some creative moments to the choreography, not just in the martial arts segments, but also in like the shootouts and in the chase sequences that I do admire. I wish they were shot a little more cleanly, and I wish they were edited a little less hectically. The shooting isn't really all that bad, like in terms of actual framing. It's mostly the editing that lets down the fights in these ones. But the fights are still plenty enjoyable. It's really worth watching for one fight scene in particular, where there's two brothers, I guess, or twins. I mean, maybe they're not actually twins. They don't really look alike, other than wearing the same outfit, and they both have like frosted tips. Both have like bleached hair. It looks ridiculous. And one of them is Cyril Raffaelli, who I love whenever he pops up and stuff. He's probably best known in the action community for District B13 or Banlieue 13, which he's great in. He has small roles and other stuff. Like you can spot him as the parkour guy in a couple of movies, or just as like one of the nameless henchmen in a fight scene, because he does a lot of like stunt work, more so than he does acting roles where he has like dialogue and whatnot. I don't think he has any dialogue in this. I think both of these henchmen guys are both silent. But he's good at this. He has the best fight by far. And maybe my favorite part of that fight is the fact that this is the big climactic fight scene. And they decided to score it with a mystical song where he is repeatedly shouting "big booty bitches" over the entire fight scene. It's hilarious and in a way that I do not at all think was intentional, and I love it. Also, shout out to Bridget Fonda in this movie. She gives a really good performance that kind of elevates the material a little bit. The character's nothing special, but her performance goes above and beyond for what was required. But another thing that kind of lets it down is the tone. A lot of elements in the script and in the choreography are like very goofy. There's like slapsticky kind of moments. There's parts where like Jet Li's fighting with like a razor scooter and stuff. The movie plays it way too straight. The movie plays it like it's supposed to be gritty and intense all the time, even when he's fighting with a scooter and like spinning it around and stuff. It's a little bit of dissonance in the tone versus what's happening on screen. But still, it is one of his better foreign-produced films outside of Hong Kong. And I'm going to put it into the C tier. It has redeeming qualities. It's definitely not one of his best, though. Next up, we have Born to Defense, which is a really bad translation. You can think of this as his like boxing movie. There's a lot of boxing in it. This one Jet Li directed pretty early on in his career, and he's not as sure-footed in the direction as he is in the fight performing. The fights are all good. The direction is a little bit sloppy. Again, not one of his best movies, but it's certainly watchable. It does feel very sloppy in a number of areas, though. And Born to Defense, it's kind of, I would put it between D and C, really. It's kind of like in that area. I'm going to be generous and give it a C tier. Next up, we have Hero, a masterpiece through and through. It's a wuxia masterpiece of the modern age. Hero is excellent, and he's not the only great one in it. Ziyi Zhang is also great in it. Donnie Yen, of course, the two of them have an on-screen fight that is legendary. It is an excellent fight scene between the two of them. It has you wishing Donnie Yen was in the movie a little bit more, but he's really just a one fight scene character in it. Jet Li is great all throughout. The film as a whole is just incredible. It's a gorgeous film. One of the best looking martial arts films out there. In the running for best looking, period, like overall. It looks incredible. The color palette is just masterful. Hero is a dynamite film all the way around, and it gets the S tier pretty handedly. Next up we have On That Night While We Dream, aka The Guardians of Martial Arts. If you've been around this channel for a while, you've heard me talk about this film before, or rant about this film before, more like. So to avoid repeating myself, I'm just going to play a clip. It's a vanity project made by Jack Ma, a Chinese businessman with a $39.2 billion network, who threw a ton of money into this piece of shit film that is just designed to make him look cool. The entire purpose for this film existing is so that Jack Ma can pretend to beat up a bunch of legendary martial arts masters with his special brand of slow fu. And it's a big slap in the face to the actual talents of the legitimate martial artists involved. Jack Ma has shitty martial arts and a face like a Lego frog. Get him out of my action movies. Damn, what a squandered gathering of talent. Jack Ma's got a head shaped like a typewriter and a face that looks like someone highlighted it and hit Command minus. Yep, On That Night While We Dream easily gets the F tier. I called it the worst film of the decade, and I'm standing by that. Next up, Fist of Legend. Fist of Legend is maybe a bit of a generic title, but don't let that confuse you, because Fist of Legend goes above and beyond. Fist of Legend is one of my favorite Jet Li films, easily. I think it has some of his best fights. He is so goddamn fast in Fist of Legend. He fights a bunch of black belts, kind of like the Donnie Yen Ip Man scene that would come later on, but more of a throwback to Bruce Lee's fight against a bunch of black belts. This fight is excellent, and Jet Li is so goddamn fast in it. I think at one point he kicks like 7 people in the span of like 3 seconds. And the final fight is excellent. You can play a drinking game where you take a sip or you do a shot every time something breaks in that fight scene. Every time someone punches through stone or someone gets thrown through a wall. That final fight scene is wonderful. Fist of Legend is great, and he's also playing the legendary Chen Zhen character that, of course, Bruce Lee played and Donnie Yen would later play. Fist of Legend is gonna get the S tier from me. I don't know if it would go an S tier for everybody. I love it. I want to rewatch it right now just thinking about it. Next up is Jet Li's Fearless. Fearless, interestingly, is directed by Ronnie Yu. The other Ronnie Yu fan that I really like is Freddy vs. Jason. Yeah, kind of a weird double feature. You watch Fearless and then you watch Freddy vs. Jason. But when you know that Freddy vs. Jason was made by a guy who made a badass martial arts film, you can kind of see it in Freddy vs. Jason. A lot of the fighting that Freddy and Jason do, it is like martial arts fighting. It's really well choreographed, intricately assembled set-piece action. That's why I love Freddy vs. Jason, and a lot of people don't like it. Fearless, I think, is excellent. I used to watch this thing on Spike TV all the time. The only bad thing I will say about Fearless is some of the editing is a little choppier than I would like. They do that thing where they cut out frames in the action scenes to make like swings and punches and kicks and stuff a little bit faster. But the thing is, Jet Li's already so fast that these feel more like jump cuts than like little frame skips to speed things up. It's just unnecessary. He's already so fast that cutting off frames makes it look choppy as opposed to making it look faster. So it's maybe just a little bit of a miscalculation. That's the only negative I can say about the action, because otherwise the fights are like top of the game. The sword fight in this, where the guy's got the huge sword with the rings on it, one of my favorite sword fights in all of cinema. I feel like I might have a little bit of like personal bias in this one, because it was one of the earlier martial arts films that I saw. This movie came out when I was like 6 years old or something, and I saw it like at a very young age. So it has like a special place in my heart, and I don't want to overrate it. Like in my heart, this is S tier. I would guess though if I were to actually strip out all of the bias, it's probably more of an A tier. So I'm going to put it in the A tier to try to cancel out personal bias. If you've seen it and you also think it's S tier though, let me know, because I would love to put it in the S tier. That's how much I love it. Next up is The Mummy. The Mummy film with Jet Li. I don't know which Mummy film this is. I think it's the second one or the third one. It's Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. I do not like the Mummy films. They are not for me. I don't like any of the Mummy films. I don't like Tom Cruise's reboot. I don't like any of the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies. I don't like the Scorpion King movie. I don't like any of the whole Mummy franchise. The only Mummy I like is the old Universal Boris Karloff Mummy movie. Go back to that. I like that. To be fair, I haven't seen them in a very long time, so maybe they will have grown on me, but I kind of doubt it. I don't like the Mummy movies. I can't remember anything about this one. I know I have seen it though. I'm going to give it the E tier. Next up is Forbidden Kingdom. The Forbidden Kingdom is a film that I was so hyped for when it was coming out. I saw this one in theaters on release day because it was Jet Li and Jackie Chan coming together. It was like my martial arts worlds were colliding at a time where I was still kind of like discovering martial arts because I was young when this came out. I saw it in the theater, and then we had this bland, like white bread protagonist. It was one of those instances that used to be everywhere and is still, unfortunately, not gone entirely, where they wanted to market a martial arts film to American audiences and they didn't trust the Hong Kong stars as like a big enough drawing force to American audiences. So they had to force in a white guy protagonist, like Bulletproof Monk and other movies like that. Maybe it's worth a revisit, because I know a lot of people who actually really like this movie. I hated it at the time. Maybe I'll revisit it. If you tell me in the comments that it's actually really good, I'll give it another watch. For right now, for how disappointing it was, I'm tempted to give it the F tier, but I'll give it a little bit of benefit of the doubt, and I'll leave it at E for right now. Next up is The Expendables 2. This one is almost in here as a formality because he was in The Expendables 1. In The Expendables 2, they pretty much just cut Jet Li out of it. I think he was busy with other stuff, and this might have been when he was going through some health issues. He's there at the beginning of the movie, he has a couple lines, and then I think he like jumps out of the plane that they're in and like parachutes away, and then he's like gone for the rest of the movie. If we're just comparing Expendables 1 to Expendables 2 as a film, I actually do like the second Expendables a little bit more than the first one. Still not great though. Still don't really like it as a movie. I'd still rank it much lower than like most decent action movies, you know. But I never saw Expendables 3, or I don't even know if they did an Expendables 4. If they did, I have not seen it. Expendables 2, I'm going to put into the D tier, right alongside the first one. Once Upon a Time in China 2. I don't think I have seen Once Upon a Time in China without watching Once Upon a Time in China 2 right afterwards. They kind of blend together in my mind as like one cinematic experience, so I have a little trouble separating them, especially considering how long it's been since I last watched either of them. So I'm just going to rank it right alongside Once Upon a Time in China 1, because I remember them being about on par, with the second one maybe being a little notch below. Next up is War with Jet Li and Jason Statham. Now, of course, a Jet Li and Jason Statham crossover is nowhere near as exciting as a Jet Li and Jackie Chan crossover, but there was a point where I was still a really big fan of Jason Statham's action work. As time has gone on, he's made more and more generic, kind of lazy, poorly scripted action films. I've become less and less a fan of Jason Statham's action work. The plot is just utter nonsense. It's full of huge plot holes. The action is terrible, not memorable whatsoever. And War is a big disappointment. E tier, easy. Next up is Unleashed. It's another one of his foreign-produced films outside of Hong Kong. This one is set in England. Again, Luc Besson was involved. He wrote the script for this one. And again, there are some sort of hip-hop style editing moments and cinematography choices, but it's much more restrained this time around. There's also a lot more, I would say, artistry going on in the director's chair this time around. The directing is just such a higher notch above his other films of that time, like Romeo Must Die and like Kiss of the Dragon. The directing is so much better, and the script is just miles ahead of either of those films. There's a lot less action in this one than in those ones. There's a huge chunk throughout the middle of the film where there are no fight scenes whatsoever. But for me, I didn't mind at all because I was actually fully engrossed in the story. I really liked the character. Bringing in higher caliber actors like Morgan Freeman and Bob Hoskins really did elevate the material. Really good acting all throughout, including from Jet Li. I think this is his best acting performance in a movie outside of his native language. I think he's great in this, like really, really good in the dialogue and dramatic scenes. He portrays such innocence and naivete and this bashful little kid essence, while in the fight scenes portraying this incredible ferocity. His physical performance and his dramatic performance are both at the top of his ability, I think. I like the premise a whole lot. This kid who was taken as a child and basically trained as a fight dog to whenever he gets unleashed, which there really isn't a leash, it's actually a collar, but calling it uncollared, it doesn't really have the same ring to it. Actually, the original title was Danny the Dog, which is a better title, I would say, but they didn't call it that in the US. I think Unleashed is far and above Jet Li's best English language film. It still doesn't really stack up too perfectly alongside his Chinese language films, but as far as his English language films go, it's like it blows the rest of them all out of the water. It's really, really good. And I had really low expectations going into it. I didn't think the trailer looked very good. And it all comes from the strength of the screenplay, I think. The fight scenes are all great, by the way. They're shot really cleanly. They're really creative, especially the action towards the end of the film. Unleashed gets the B tier. And if I were only ranking his English language films, and like there had to be an S, Unleashed would be the S tier of his English language films. Next up, we have The One. The One is a martial arts sci-fi film, which could work in theory, but they don't mesh here at all. Jet Li is The One, and he's like a super-powered guy. He's basically playing multiple roles in this one. He's like the good guy and the bad guy. Jason Statham's actually in this one too, an earlier role for him. This is before War. This wasn't like billed as a matchup of them because Jason Statham wasn't as big of an action star at that point. The One is just so goofy. You can't take this one seriously. The movie itself is trying to be very serious, like tell this like epic sci-fi action story. It's trying to be The Matrix. In the wake of The Matrix, every movie wanted to be The Matrix. This is no exception. This is leaning very hard into those Matrix tropes, and it does not at all deliver on them. The effects are horrible. The movie is it's such a mess. It's almost so bad it's funny, but not quite. I know a lot of people who, if they don't fully like this movie, they at least really like and really stick up for the ending fight scene, which is a big Jet Li on top of this pyramid fighting off a bunch of other Jet Lis, and he's like the one defending against all the others. And it's cool in concept, but it's literally like one shot and then pan up the credits. I don't know how that can redeem the whole movie for you. Does that redeem the movie? No, not even close. The One is awful. I think it fully deserves the F tier. One cool shot at the end of the movie does not redeem it. The rest of the movie is garbage. And last up, we have Cradle to the Grave. It's Jet Li and DMX. You got Tom Arnold in the mix. Whereas The One was almost so bad it's good, I think Cradle to the Grave actually is so bad it's good. Oh, ignore the number 2, by the way. As far as I can tell, Cradle to the Grave isn't a sequel to Cradle 1 the Grave. This one's really funny. It's a mess. The story is awful. The action isn't particularly memorable. There's an MMA cage fight that's kind of cool. Probably the most memorable moment in the movie to me that isn't like a funny moment that's like actually kind of cool is when Jet Li descends the side of this big hotel by like hanging off a balcony and like letting go and then grabbing onto the next balcony and then dropping and catching on the next one. That's actually pretty goddamn cool. And I might be the only one who has connected these dots. They ripped off that moment in Stuber. I never expected any movie to rip off Cradle to the Grave, let alone Stuber. But yeah, they had Iko Uwais do the same thing in a hotel, no less, where he's dropping down levels, just like Jet Li does in Cradle to the Grave. I'm calling you out, Stuber. You ripped off Cradle to the Grave. I mean, maybe it was an homage, but who's got to homage Cradle to the Grave? It is very funny, though. The fact how funny it is elevates it from being like F tier. Because the actual movie quality is pretty much F tier, but for how fun it is, I gotta give it D tier. It's highly watchable. And that's my ranking. We got a pretty good spread here. We only have one in the A tier, but like I said, martial arts of Shaolin could maybe be bumped up to an A. We got a lot of C's and we got a lot of E's. We got a couple solid S tier films. If you've only seen Jet Li's English language films, then you owe it to yourself to check out his Hong Kong made films. They're much better across the board. So that was my ranking of 18 Jet Li films. Make sure you check out my Jackie Chan tier list, my Iko Uwais tier list, and my Tony Jaa tier list. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm shooting this at the same time as my tier list for Donnie Yen, so check that out too. It's probably already up by the time you're watching this. Make sure you subscribe and stick around if you want more martial arts movie content and just other film content in general. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.